Thanks, Eric, and welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Glad to have you with us. We're going to cover a lot of ground tonight, but hopefully give some information for everybody. A little bit of something for beginner, maybe a few tips for those pros as well. So we'll dive right in here. That's me, Eric. Just told you about me. That's, as he said, that's where I work there at Sporty's, best place in the world. Do get to fly with video cameras in a number of different aircraft. A lot of Cessnas here at Sporty's in our flight school. Get to fly in our Aztec, even helicopters and some other fun stuff. So have really had the pleasure of flying with this technology for a couple of years now, and whole variety of aircraft. Want to start out with a video that many of you have probably seen. If you haven't, you need to see it. If you have and you haven't seen it lately, I'd encourage you to go watch it. It's called Laney's First Airplane Ride. And you can go to YouTube and search for that, you'll find it. And it's just a video that a dad made of a flight taking his daughter on her first airplane ride in a J3 Cup out of a grass strip. And there's nothing fancy about it. This is not production polished by any means. But it's a dad with an iPhone or with a GoPro, and made a really compelling video that absolutely captures why we all fly, and really, I think, shares the magic of aviation better than any speech any of us could ever give. We've all been there when we try to describe what's flying like. The answer is usually some mumbled mess that comes out of our mouth. The best answer I have is go watch that, and you'll understand the joy on the child's face. It sort of goes from fear and trepidation to excitement and then pure joy as she's clapping. It's just magical. So that's really what it's all about. Yeah, nobody needs a video camera maybe. It's not an airworthiness item, but it really is a powerful thing, and I think that's why it's become so popular lately. You know, hardly anybody was flying with video cameras 3 years ago, and now we're having more and more people every day flying with these things, and I think that's a great example. So a quick overview of what we're going to cover tonight. We'll talk about a few uses for a camera, try to give you some reasons why you might fly with it besides just that it's a fun gadget. We'll go through some terms. There's definitely some technological terms you're going to run across in this part of technology. We'll try to decode those to understand what we're talking about. We'll talk about choosing a camera and some of the options that are out there, including some new ones that have just hit the market. We'll talk about some specific aviation considerations when you use a camera in the cockpit. And then we'll close with some tips for once you have a camera, how do you make better, more interesting videos. First thing to start off with is, as always, I think, a definition. So what the heck is an action camera is what you hear a lot, or a POV camera, or sometimes a POV action camera. Or more and more you hear GoPro. GoPro has sort of become the Kleenex of video cameras. People say they're flying with a GoPro even if it's not really a GoPro branded camera. What we're really talking about here is a compact, durable HD camera. These are small devices that capture high-definition video and photos, usually with a microphone as well. And they were not created by pilots. They were created by mostly skiers, surfers, snowboarders, skydivers, and scuba divers. These are people who needed small cameras to document their really cool adventures. And so, for example, GoPro is really founded by a group of surfers. The end result, though, is that the same requirements those people have are many of the same requirements we have as pilots. And so these cameras have become really popular with pilots because they fit our mission very, very well. After all, we need things that are compact, durable, and the HD video is a great way to share our passion. So let's talk briefly about why you would use a video camera in the cockpit. Maybe this is obvious for some, but I think it's worth considering what you would use a camera for besides just having the latest and greatest gadget. And so I think there actually are a few interesting uses. First of all is flight training, and we're seeing this more and more. You've probably heard that the cockpit is not a great classroom, and I'd have to agree with that. We all have to fly. We all have to train in the airplane. But many times you're flying, you're so focused on flying the airplane, you're so wrapped up in that, that it's really difficult to learn a whole lot from it. You know, I can remember being a student and my instructor trying to explain to me crosswind landings, and I couldn't process any of it because I was just trying to keep the airplane from going sideways on the runway. What a video camera can allow you to do is hit the pause button, right? Come back and debrief a flight, not just with words, but debrief with video and potentially audio as well, really help you recreate a flight. It's great for communications, and it's just great for students to review without the stress and the heat and the turbulence that you find in the cockpit. So we're seeing a lot more flight schools adopt video cameras as a training tool. Not a replacement for training, but a way to get more out of every hour. And that ends up saving the student money, which makes them a more satisfied customer. Memorable flights is probably the best one. The question there at the top, I think, is relevant. Do you really remember your first solo? I really don't. I remember getting my shirt tail cut off. I remember after my first solo, but I think I was so focused on my actual flying of that solo that the actual time in the air is a bit of a blur. And here's a great way to record that first solo or any unique flight. Maybe you made a trip to Leadville and got the highest airport in the U.S. hat. Maybe you flew to Oshkosh for the first time, your first Bahamas trip. Whatever it is, it's a great way to have a keepsake or memento from a memorable flight. In fact, at Sporty's Academy, our flight school here, we've started recording, if the customer approves it, we started recording every first solo. And at first we weren't sure that, are people really, do they want to be recorded for that? The overwhelming response is yes. It's a great way to show your friends and family what you've been doing this whole time. I know my brother goes off to the airport and I know he does flight training, but what's it really like? Here's a way to share that. Here's a way to put that person in the cockpit with you on your first solo. It's a great way for you to remember that momentous flight, but it's also a great way to share it with others. And I think it does good things for aviation when we share those stories. Aerobatics may not be something all of us do, but if you do fly aerobatics, this can be a great tool. Even the most skilled aerobatic pilots really can't fly aerobatics for more than about 30 minutes. It's a physically demanding thing. But with some video cameras, you can, again, get more out of every practice flight. You can really see how you're shaping up as an aerobatic pilot. And then sharing, I mentioned a little bit before, but I think of it as a 21st century photo album. Would you rather flip through a couple photos of somebody's trip to Oshkosh, or would you rather ride in the right seat with them as they land on the green dot and hear the communications as the controllers talk a mile a minute? With these cameras and all the options with YouTube and social media, there are so many options for sharing these things that it really is, in a sense, a photo album. It's also, beyond just your friends and family, it's a great way to share training with other student pilots. So if you're a student pilot and you're struggling with crosswind landings, it can be kind of a fun way to share your training ups and downs with others out there. Finally, I don't necessarily advocate this, but you can use it as a bit of a mini black box. I know of one club that has put cameras in airplanes more as kind of a flight data monitoring system. You don't want to go too far on this, but at the very least you can find out where have they been, what have they done. So with those uses in mind, let's talk about the terms and technology. What are we really talking about when we throw around all these specs? As we often say, it's meaningless jargon spoken here. We seem to specialize in that when it comes to pilots a lot of times. So let's sort through some of the most common terms you see here on your screen. First of all is POV. I mentioned that before. You'll often hear these referred to as POV cameras. That stands for point of view, meaning you see, as the viewer of the video, you see what the person doing that activity saw. So if you're skiing and the POV camera's on top of your helmet, you see the skier's point of view. Pilot, if it's on your headset, for example, you see the point of view. Just a term we use to describe this type of camera. Here's a big one. How about 1080p versus 720p versus 1080i and all these different things? You hear this if you've ever bought a TV at a Best Buy or something like that, and you can get swarmed by all these terms. All we're really talking about here is a measure of video quality or resolution. So 1080p means there are 1080 lines of vertical resolution, and the P part means it's progressive, not interlaced in the way it does it. At the end of the day, I wouldn't get too caught up in this. 1080p is what most TVs are these days. That's what you would hear referred to as full HD. But even 720p for most of what we're going to be doing, 720p is pretty darn good. So you probably can't tell the difference. It's not a huge deal. We're really just talking about resolution. The latest thing to hit the market is what's called 4K video. And 4K, just like 1080p, is simply a measure of resolution. So 4K means it has 4,096 pixels. That's 4 times more than 1080p, so that may say to you, wow, what a great thing, I've got to have it. More is better. And certainly 4K video is fantastic, but it's really overkill unless you're working in Hollywood. In fact, most TVs still to this day that you buy and most computers can't even show 4K. So 4K is nice, but I think if anybody tries to convince you that it's a must-have, they're really overselling. How about FPS? That's another big term we hear with cameras. FPS stands for frames per second. So that's how many frames in each second of video. 30 frames per second, or 30 FPS, is standard television. If you just turn on regular TV, you'll see that. 60 frames per second, which is another common setting you can find in these cameras, is obviously double that. What that means is, in particular, slow motion looks better. So if I'm going to do a super slow-mo, 60 or even 120 frames per second can look really neat, whereas 30 frames a second may look a little bit jumpy. Again, nice to have, but you probably can't tell the difference with this, just like you can't tell the difference with 1080p and 720p. I have on the screen there, if you've ever watched golf on TV and they have this swing vision thing where they slow down the golfer's swing and you can see the golf ball compressing as it hits the club head. It's really fantastic. It's really exciting. That's 6,000 frames per second. So even at 60 or 120 FPS, you're not going to get that super slow motion golf swing vision type of thing. Field of view is the other critical thing I think we talk about. In terms of these specs, resolution, frames per second, field of view, these are really the big ones. And that just describes how much of the scene you see. So it's really, are we talking about a wide angle or narrow? And most of these POV cams we talk about have wide angle lenses, especially for skiers and surfers. They want that immersive experience where you can really see this wide angle view of what you're doing. So 170-degree lens is very common. What that does, though, is it tends to give you a bit of a fisheye look. There's a little bit of distortion in there, and all these camera manufacturers work to minimize that, but there's some inherent distortion in there. As you see on the screen there from left to right, you can see field of view, and on the far right it's zoomed in, so you don't have that wraparound immersive experience, but you also have a little bit tighter shot and a little bit less distortion. Some of the cameras we'll talk about tonight have a selectable or an adjustable field of view, and so that's what we're talking about when we're adjusting field of view. Important to note here that these things all have trade-offs. So a great example is if I want to shoot at 4K video on a GoPro, I can shoot at 4K video, but only at 15 frames per second. If I want to slow down to 120 frames per second and do that slow motion, I've got to ratchet the resolution down to 720p. Same for field of view. So if I want to do that narrower field of view, I've got to, again, pull that down to 1080p or 720p. The reason for this is that on the field of view, what they're basically doing is there aren't multiple lenses here. So what they're doing is basically cropping the picture, zooming in on the picture. So if you shoot at 4K and then zoom in so that it's narrow instead of ultra wide, that by nature is going to knock it down to 1080p. It's a really smart way to do it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just the reason, it's to understand why there are these trade-offs with these specs. The last one most of us probably know, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. Almost all of these cameras have one or the other just as a way of communicating wirelessly with either a remote or a smartphone app. Increasingly, that's how these devices are controlled. Yes, they have buttons to start and stop recording on them, but a lot of them, to use some of the higher-end features, you're going to use an app or remote control. So given that background now, with all the terms and technology hopefully squared away, let's talk about a buyer's guide and sort of what to look for in a camera, because let's be honest, the choices have never been bigger. You can go into any store anywhere or on the internet and be absolutely inundated with these cameras. So let's talk about what really matters. And we'll go through a couple things here to look at, from resolution, lens quality, field of view, and some other features. Hopefully try to narrow down here what really matters and what you can ignore. The first thing we mentioned a little bit earlier, but is resolution. So I wouldn't get caught up in this. All these POV cameras shoot great resolution. I can't think of a single one out there that doesn't shoot 1080p. Some do 4K, but as I said before, that's certainly not a must-have. Nice to have, sure, and if you have a fancy new 4K TV, go for it, but I really wouldn't consider 4K a must-have. 1080p looks great. And let's be honest, none of us are probably Steven Spielberg, so we're probably not going to be ruining our video if it's only 1080p. So I wouldn't get caught up in the resolution too much. Do consider the frame rate options if you think you might use some of the slow motion stuff. The lens is very important. It really has to do with things like sharpness, low light performance, distortion. This is a tough one, though, because it's really not something you can judge on specs alone. This is really one of those, is it good or is it great? And you can tell when you see it. That makes it hard to, to sort out maybe, but I'd say the best thing to do here is read up on it, read customer reviews on it. Again, most of the cameras we're going to talk about tonight, especially the big two, really have good lenses, so not a big difference between them, but just something to be aware of, especially if you think you've got a hot deal on a cheap camera. Check out that lens, because that's usually where they start to cut corners. Adjustable field of view I mentioned earlier, but that's just another feature to look for in the buyer's guide. I think this is actually really important, because in aviation, when we're flying, we really don't need wide angle all the time. So the screen on the left is a great example of a wide angle lens working great. You can see the entire cockpit, even with the camera mounted 6 to 12 inches away from the pilot. That's great. But what about shooting straight out through the windshield? You want to zoom in on the runway or something interesting on the ground. That wide angle lens is not the best thing for that approach. So that's where an adjustable field of view where you can switch back and forth, I think is a great feature to have, and something I'd really look for. Still photos are also something to keep in mind. Most of us probably don't buy these cameras to shoot still photos. We shoot them we buy them to do videos. But having said that, still photos can be pretty nice, and in fact, many of these cameras can shoot both still photos and video at the same time. Pretty nice feature. Most of the time they'll have a couple different modes. You can take a single picture, or you can take a burst mode, which is what you see on the screen there, where 10 photos were taken in a single second, so it's kind of a freeze frame look. Time-lapse is another interesting one where you can set the camera to take a photo every minute or 5 minutes, and it's kind of a neat way to log a trip. I saw somebody do this where they drove Route 66 all the way and had a GoPro on the hood of the car, taking a photo every 5 minutes, and it's a really neat travel log. We've done the same thing here with airplanes. I had a guy fly to Oshkosh, and instead of video, he did it as a time-lapse. And it's really kind of a neat way to relive a flight, so it's something to consider. Again, a lot of these cameras have that. Battery life is a big one. Most of these cameras are small, and they really, really prize that small size. The problem with that is what you give up in size, usually you give up in battery life. So some of these cameras have an hour or even less than an hour battery life. That's really something to pay attention to. Most often, you don't need to shoot more than an hour video. Let's be honest, there's not 2 hours of interesting flying in most of our flights, so you can be smart about how you manage that. You can also be smart about how you manage settings, and we'll talk about this later, but 4K video or 120 frames per second can really suck up the battery life a lot compared to a lower setting. So there are some things you can do, and there are external battery packs and cigarette lighter chargers. There's lots of ways to manage this. But at the end of the day, that does involve a little bit of hassle. So I would consider battery life when you look at all of these cameras. Remote control or app, this is what we talked about when we were talking about Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Really nice feature, especially if you're, say you're an experimental aircraft owner and you want to mount the camera externally. This is a great way to start and stop recording without having to have the camera in reach. Maybe you've got the camera in the back of the aircraft pointing forward to get the whole cockpit. You can't quite reach it without taking your hands off the controls. This is a great way to control it. Used to be most of these cameras came with dedicated remote controls. More and more they're going to apps because the apps are even more full-featured. You can use the app as a viewfinder, so you can line up your shots, see exactly what the camera sees. The other option is some cameras have a built-in screen. So if you don't want to use the app, you can actually just see the screen preview right there on the camera. Garmin VIRB is one of those, which you see here. It does make the camera bigger, and that's one downside, but it can be a handy feature. All right, so with that buyer's guide in mind, let's consider the market and what are the options out there for buying a camera. The good news is almost every camera out there, and certainly the 5 we'll highlight tonight, share a lot of fantastic specs. All of these shoot HD video and have microphones. All of these are compact, rugged, and water resistant. They have wide-angle lenses. They're all pretty easy to use. You can geek out on them and make them complicated, but for basic everyday use, they're really pretty easy to use. They all shoot video in standard formats, so they're very shareable, and they all take still photos. So every one we're about to talk about does all of those, which is, I think, the essential features. But as I mentioned, there are lots of choices. There are certainly more than the 5 you see here on the screen. I think these are the 5 that are the most popular, or certainly the ones I see most people flying with. So we'll just briefly run through these and share with you some of the specs on these and what to expect. First is obviously the GoPro. As I said, it's become kind of the Kleenex of HD video cameras. It is the market leader. It's got a lot of great specs. So it will do 4K video, for example. You can shoot at 120 frames per second. You've got lots of different options and settings there. It has an adjustable field of view. It's also really the smallest one out there. They have shrunk this down and down to where it weighs almost nothing. It includes a remote control, which you see there, but also a free app as an option. The one drawback I see here is there's no GPS in the GoPro, but there are 3 options from $199 to $399. The $399 is the black edition, and that's by far the most popular, what you see most of. It's probably the best overall combination of quality, features, size, price, you know, all in one package. It's the most popular for a reason. It's a great camera. Recently, last fall, Garmin entered the market for cameras, and they entered it in a pretty good way. I think they've got a nice GoPro challenger here. It's a little bit bigger than a GoPro, but the reason it's bigger, I think, are pretty good reasons. So it's on par with GoPro in terms of quality. Won't shoot to 4K video, but again, 1080p. And the lens we found in our testing is very good. The camera does good in low light situations. And a couple of features I really like about the VIRB is it has a built-in GPS, which for pilots really makes it even more interesting to record your flights. It has a screen built into the top of the camera, which is really nice and easy for adjusting settings. And it's got a much better battery life than GoPro. It's about a 3+ hour battery life, which is more than enough for most of your flying trips. So for those reasons, I think it's a pretty compelling product. There's 2 models, $299 and $399. The main difference there is that the $399 model includes the GPS. So for pilots, I think the $399 model, which is called the VIRB Elite, is really the preferred one. Beyond those 2 big names, there's Contour. Contour was one of the first companies in this market. They've been around a long time. And they have a sort of a bullet style camera here, very compact camera. It has a built-in GPS like the VIRB. It has an interesting feature in that the lens rotates, and the value there is that you can mount this camera in almost any direction and simply rotate the lens so that the picture is always right side up. Pretty handy feature if you're mounting it in an odd location. It's got built-in Bluetooth, and so it has an app so you can adjust it. 2 models, $199 and $299. One of the more durable and compact cameras out there, and certainly a good price as well. Sony is certainly a huge name when it comes to electronics and cameras, and they were somewhat late to this market, but launched a camera last year that was okay. They recently announced a new one here, which you see on the screen. It should be available any day now, and this looks like a much upgraded one, sort of a 2nd generation product that I think is going to be a solid camera. It's got some image stabilization built in. It's got a great lens. I mean, Sony's been knows how to make a good lens, and so I think it's got an excellent lens with some good image stabilization on it. It has both a remote and a screen, a more basic screen than the VIRB. It's more of a settings screen, not so much a viewfinder screen, but it also has a GPS, so I think this is one to watch. Haven't had the chance to fly with this one yet, but should have a lot of interesting features. $299 or $399 if you get it with the remote. The nice thing about this remote is it actually has a viewfinder on it, so it's more than just a button to push. The last one I'll mention is the Drift HD Ghost S. Drift is another company that's been around a while making cameras. This is another, I'd call it 2nd generation, maybe even 3rd generation product. Has a big built-in screen. Because of that, it's a little bit larger. but it also has the rotating lens, like the Contour, has a good battery life, has the remote control and app option. It has, again, a lot of resolution frame rate options, probably more than almost anybody, and it's $399. What you see here is that a lot of these cameras share a lot of specs in common. The prices are about the same. The core features are about the same. What's it come down to? Well, I think, to me, it really comes down to Garmin or GoPro. These are really the two market leaders, I think. These are the two that we certainly see pilots flying with most often. And I think they're the two that have the most complete offerings. So when considering Garmin or GoPro, we're really talking about Coke or Pepsi or Ford and Chevy here. You're not going to go wrong with either one. These are both great cameras. If you do want to compare the two, here's a couple of ways to look at it, I think. The VIRB is bigger, and the VIRB app is not as good as the GoPro app. But like I said, it has that built-in screen, it has a GPS, it does really well in low light conditions, and it's got a great battery life. The GoPro Hero 3 Plus, which is the latest version, in the black edition, which is that $399 model, the high-end one, it's got some good image stabilization built in. It's very popular, and one of the things that means is there's great support for it online. You can find lots of good help documents, lots of cool videos, how-to videos on the GoPro, and that can be helpful if you're getting started. And it's also the smallest size, as I mentioned. The downsides I see with the GoPro is the battery life is one of the weakest of the group because of that small size. There's no screen to preview it, and there's no GPS. Again, both are outstanding cameras. For me, I think the Garmin VIRB wins by a nose. If you're interested in a GoPro, I wouldn't talk you out of it. But if I had my pick, I'd say Garmin just by a hair, because I think that battery life and GPS are really key features for pilots. Again, these all do great in terms of shooting video. That's my opinion. I'm sure there's some that disagree. As I said, I don't think any of these are a bad camera. We're kind of splitting hairs here at the end. So that's the overview of the market and the cameras out there, but there are some specific aviation considerations out there that we need to think about. So let's talk about some of those and some of the accessories that are out there to help. The first one you've seen if you've ever been on YouTube and you see somebody shooting a video, and it's the propeller distortion. If you're shooting out the front of an airplane, a single-engine airplane, the propeller will look all chopped up and wavy and ugly. This is called the rolling shutter effect. It's not a bug, it's just a function of the way the sensor works in all these digital cameras. You can spend $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 and get a fancy pro camera and get rid of this problem. But basically the type of sensor that these cameras use in these small POV cameras, they're all susceptible to this. So you're not going to avoid this one model to the other. And it's just because of the way the camera takes the images in the propeller. It can be kind of distracting. The other big piece I think for pilots is audio. All these cameras, if you just stick them on your side window and go flying, you're going to hear a really boring soundtrack of engine noise, which really doesn't add a whole lot to the flight. So while they have microphones, they won't record your intercom or ATC, and I think that's a big deal. It's a really big deal in flight training because you want to hear the communications and learn about it. It's also a big deal, though, for Oshkosh. I flew to Oshkosh and recorded it a couple years ago, and the thing we get the most comments on for that video is the audio, because you want to hear the Oshkosh controllers talking fast. So I think audio is a big consideration, and as these cameras are out of the box, they don't have any way to record that audio. Well, you know where this is leading. Obviously, someone has stepped in to solve this problem. So there is a great cable available from In-Flight Cam, who's made a GoPro audio cable. Real simple. It plugs into the side of the GoPro camera. You plug your headset into the plug, and then the other plug into the intercom. Basically, it's just a way to put a T into your headset cable, and you'll hear everything you hear in your headset. So intercom conversations, air traffic control over the radio. There's a noise filter in this cable, so it works really well. It's not just a dummy plug, and it's a big upgrade for recording your flights. It does work with twin plug headsets, but if you're out there flying with a Limo plug, one of those panel power plugs, the good news is you have a spare plug because you're not using your twin plugs. So you can just plug this directly into your intercom. So you do have an option there. For the propeller distortion, there's also an answer, and these are a series of lens filters, again, in-flight cams come up with. These are available for the Hero 3 and the Hero 3 Plus, and they work, I'd say, 90% of light conditions, different sun angles, different times of day, different propeller RPMs. You're never going to get 100%, but works very, very well. You can see it before and after. That's the same airplane. That's a Piper Malibu on the left with no filter, on the right with the filter. Like I said, 9 times out of 10, it's going to remove all of that prop distortion. One note here is that this snaps onto the waterproof case for the GoPro, not directly on the camera. That's usually not a big deal because the GoPro includes the waterproof case, so it's not like an extra accessory you have to buy. But it's just something to keep in mind. If you want to get it all, we've got these packaged up into different kits. So in this case, we've got the Cockpit kit. This is $99 for 8 starter kit. It includes a suction cup mount to put it on a side window, a lens filter for the GoPro, and the audio cable. Everything you need to go flying. If you want to step up to a deluxe kit, this includes the suction cup mount, the 2-lens prop filter for light and dark conditions, the GoPro skeleton case, which is the way that it's a special case that allows you to plug in the audio to the side, so it's required. This is $199 for a more deluxe kit. One other nice accessory that's out there for, this is for both the GoPro and the VIRB, is an external mount. So you can remove a screw, say in your wingtip, and then put that screw back down through this metal piece, and you basically have a hard point to mount to. And this external mount goes right on that, and you can mount your GoPro to it. It's rock solid. It works really well. We've had people fly aerobatics with this thing on there, and it's really neat. The question you're all asking is it legal? And the short answer is, for experimental aircraft, yes. For certified aircraft, no. Most likely it's not legal. So you want to be smart about this, and you certainly don't want to put this in any control surfaces or anything like that. The FAA is, I guess, a little bit vague on this, but I think any honest reading of the rules would tell you that it's really not legal to externally mount a camera in a permanent way like this on a certified airplane. For the VIRB, this is just coming out, so it's not quite available yet, but they're going to have a Garmin VIRB for aviation, which is the Garmin VIRB Elite with a propeller filter, with a audio cable and a mount, all in one kit. So look for that very soon. That's coming, and that will be similar to the GoPro. That'll be an all-in-one, ready-to-go flying solution for the VIRB. There's one more camera we haven't talked about that I'm just going to spend a couple of slides talking about because it may not be something you've considered, and that's the iPhone. And you may be saying, really? The iPhone? How can that possibly compare to a GoPro? And in some ways it certainly doesn't. But in many ways it does. The iPhone, particularly the newer ones, the iPhone 5 and 5S, shoot 1080p video, 8 megapixel still photos, a pretty darn good lens. So it takes pretty darn good video, it really does. And the big advantage here is it's easy to share. Once you've recorded the video, you don't have to go sync it to a computer or anything like that. You go right to it and email it to a friend or post it to YouTube, you're done. So it's really easy to use in that regard. And the other thing, by the way, it's always with you, so you don't have to remember to bring it with you. Most of us don't get more than 6 feet away from our smartphones all day long. We get panicked if we do. So it's always with you. So it's just something to consider, maybe in addition to a GoPro or maybe as a way to get started. And for those pilots, in-flight cam does offer an accessory kit here. Same thing, lens filter that reduces the prop blur, the audio cable for your iPhone to help you record all that intercom and ATC audio, and a suction cup mount. Nice thing here is it's universal to work with or without a case. Works very, very well. You might be surprised how good it is. Quick question I'm sure we'll get there is Android. The answer is that the prop filter will work on Android. The audio cable is hit and miss, and that has to do with the way some phone manufacturers allow you to use mic in or not. So I don't have a blanket answer for you there. It's really hit and miss on the audio cable part for Android. So now that we've bought our video, we bought our video camera, we understand what it's all about, we understand the features. Let's go out and shoot some videos and try to make something that's interesting, because we don't want to spend the money and go shoot a video and bore everyone to death. So a couple tips we've learned in a couple years flying with these, and some tips from our video pros here who produce videos for a living. The most important question, and this is probably going to sound obvious, but the most important question is, what are you trying to shoot? It's not about the specs or the setup so much as think like a video director or producer. What do you want to shoot? What's the story you're trying to tell? Even if it's just a trip around the pattern, what's the story you want to tell with this video? Because that dictates how you shoot it and what you shoot. The most important thing, I think, is shot selection. So let's go through a couple different views here you can use to shoot. First is the pilot's eye view, right? This is the POV solution. This is great for takeoffs and landings, great for en route weather, maneuvers. This is the way to show somebody, here's what I saw sitting in the left seat. A great thing to do here is to use a suction cup mount it to a side window just to the left of the pilot, and you can really put somebody in the cockpit with you. But there's more to it than that, and a lot of pilots stop right there. There's more to it than that. Side view can be surprisingly interesting for en route scenery or maneuvers or weather. Just flip it around and point it out the side of the wing. Flip around another 90 degrees and you can shoot the cockpit. You can get pilots and passengers. Again, this is where that wide-angle lens really comes into play. You can usually get the entire cockpit. Here's a Cessna Skycatcher, not a spacious airplane by any means, and yet we've got both pilots and even a view out the window. So this is, again, this is good for maybe flight instruction. You want to see the interaction between student and instructor, or if you're doing Laney's first flight and you've got a kid up there and you want to see the expression on their face, this is what you do. Instrument panel is another good one, particularly for training, particularly for instrument training. This can be very, very useful for instrument training to see the instrument panel, and it works really well. Another one I like a lot is the over-the-shoulder view. This is kind of the trying to have your cake and eat it too, where you get the pilot flying and the screens on the panel and out the front window. This is sort of the right seat passenger view. You can see everything going on. You have to get a little creative with the mounting in this situation, but you can do it in most airplanes, again with the wide angle setting. And it's really an immersive experience. It does put the viewer in the cockpit. And the key here is to use all of these. If you're going to go shoot a 1-hour flight, for heaven's sake, please don't shoot out the front window for 1 hour straight. Unless you're flying the Grand Canyon, that's going to be a boring flight. So the right way to do it is mix it up. Point out the front, pilot's eye view for takeoff. Switch to a side view en route to get an interesting something on the ground. Cut to an inside panel view to show the altitude and the ground speed or the moving map. Cut to a full cockpit shot to give a sense for the environment in the panel. And then go back to that pilot's eye view for landing. That's really what it comes to when it comes to movie making, is changing those shots, moving it around, telling a story, and keeping the viewer's interest by mixing it up. Again, sounds simple, but it is the most important tip for shooting an interesting video. Consider what you're shooting, what story you want to tell, and mix up the camera angles. Another really important tip is if you're going to record the whole flight, which I don't necessarily recommend, but if you're going to record the whole flight, from one location, say put it on the side window and shoot out the front the whole time. Stop and start the camera at various times. If you start the camera and just flat out record an hour and a half, it's really harder to work with that because you've got one video file. If you start and stop the camera for takeoff, say, and an interesting view of weather, and then landing, it's much easier to manage those files. They're much smaller. It's just a lot better way to do it. So don't hit record and forget about it. You want to start and stop on scenes. Now, a scene could be 15 minutes, but I would encourage you to start and stop on scenes. Mounting really does matter, and rigidity is the key in an airplane. Airplanes have vibrations, and vibrations can cause distortion in the video. You can get what's called jello a lot of times, where this whole camera seems to kind of be wobbly and shaky, or the video seems to be vibrating from the inside out. Rigidity is the key. I like a suction cup mount a lot. The GoPro suction cup mount, for example, the Garmin VIRB one as well. They're really good suction cup mounts. Roll bar mounts, another option to consider. Use a good mount. You can also use a ram mount. Ram mounts are very popular these days. They're very well made mounts. They're rock solid. If you've got a ram mount, the Ram sells an adapter. You see it there. It's a little ram ball that has the little teeth that will adapt to either a GoPro or a VIRB. And so if you've maybe got a suction cup ram mount that you really like, or another ram mount you like, you can use your camera with those mounts. Another option that some people use is called the CoPilot mount. This stretches out. It's sort of a spring-loaded pole that goes between the back two windows, suction cups on, and what that gives you is a view right between the two seats of the panel. This can be great for instrument training because you can really see the whole panel. As I said earlier, no matter what you mount to, rigidity is the key. So if you're using a suction cup mount, get it down close to the edge of a window. There's usually less vibration there where the window is close to a place where it has some reinforcement. Lock down those screws as tight as you can stand it. If you've got a ram mount, lock those down tight. And then use the mobile app as a viewfinder. So you want to get that camera to where it looks like it's level, looks like it's correct, but then get in there with that app and make sure it's lined up just the way you want it. Do this on the ground. Do this before you start the engine so you're not impatient with it. Now, settings are important. As I said before, it's not the most important thing, but your camera settings do matter. So what I really recommend, the short answer is 1080p and 30 FPS. And the reason I say that is better battery life, number one. If you're on a GoPro, for example, 4K video resolution will really eat up your battery faster, and for really not a great reason, right? You probably can't even watch it that way. So 1080p is more than enough, saves battery life. As I said, your TV probably can't even play higher than that. And it also maximizes your recording time. 4K video files are huge. You will chew up an SD card in a hurry at 1080p. And 30 FPS, just because, again, that saves battery life, and that's really the standard setting. So 1080p, 30 FPS. If you're a pro and you know better, you want to do something, go for it. But if you're a casual user, I think you can set this once and forget about it. You don't need to go messing with these resolution and frame rate every time you fly. Quick recording time. These are round numbers, but just to give you a sense, all these cameras, for the most part, run on micro SD cards. 16, 32, and 64 gig cards are common. 32 gigs on this 1080p, 30 frame per second setting. 32 gigs will get you about 3.5 hours. And you know, for most of us, that's more than enough. So pretty good setting there. Lighting is also really important. When you fly matters. When we shoot videos for Sporty's video training courses, we'd like to do it early in the morning. That's almost always the best time. It's smooth. The lighting is more even and balanced. The colors are more dynamic. You can expose the inside and outside of the plane. It's a good time to fly. High noon sun, you can do it obviously, but it just doesn't look quite as good. So I'm a big fan of shooting early, using the sun to help paint your canvas instead of fighting against it all day long. Auto exposure is what you're going to deal with in all these cameras. They're auto exposure, every one of them. And the only thing to recognize, especially in bright light like you see here, is this camera has gotten the exposure set for out the window. So look, you can see the airport pretty well, but look at the panel, it's completely blacked out. That's just a fact of life. You won't be able to see both inside and outside all the time, especially in bright light. Keep that in mind. Consider the sun angle. Consider which one you really want to see more. And again, line this up in the app if you can. Here are the apps, just so you can go find them. GoPro has an app. It's for iOS and Android. Start-stop recording, adjust settings. So if you wanted to, for example, go from that ultra-wide field of view to a more narrow view halfway through the flight, you don't have to go mess with the camera. Just pull up the app, change that setting right in the app, and start recording. Garmin has a VIRB app as well for iOS and Android. Not quite as full-featured as GoPro, but I'm sure they'll be improving that as time goes on. Garmin offers a couple of other options. One that's pretty neat for pilots is that you can control the VIRB in their Garmin Pilot app. Garmin Pilot is a full electronic flight bag moving map charting app, and that's available for iOS and Android. And you can do a split screen mode here where you've got your moving map up top and you've got your VIRB control on the bottom, the viewfinder. It's a pretty neat setup. You don't have to leave your navigation app to go mess with the video settings. So a nice feature for anybody who's flying with Garmin Pilot and VIRB. And if you really want to geek out and just shame all of your friends, you can actually control a VIRB with the new Garmin D2 Pilot Watch. This is a GPS-enabled smartwatch Garmin introduced that's been very, very popular. And yes, you can start and stop recording your VIRB from your watch. Look like Dick Tracy. Make it be a hero with all your hangar buddies. A couple quick things to consider. Most of these are obvious, but before you go shooting video, a quick pre-flight is a smart thing to do. Number one, clean your windows and avionics screens. I know that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised what a dirty bug-covered windshield can do to trash a perfectly good flying day. You could fly past Mount Rushmore at 10 feet. If you've got bugs all over your window, it's going to look terrible. So take 2 minutes, clean your windows, clean your avionics screens, clean the camera lens as well. Get those fingerprints off of there. Charge up that battery. Again, some of these have short battery life, and you're going to want to make sure you have as much battery life in there as you can. And then erase the memory card. May not be a must-do every time, but I like to get in the habit of after I've recorded the video, come back, dump that video onto my computer, go ahead and erase that memory card so you don't run out, 30 seconds before landing. So once we've shot our video, once we've come back, loaded up on our computer, question we get a lot is, what do I do with it? How do I edit it and share it? And there are editing programs that go up into the tens of thousands of dollars. The good news is for most of us, I think that's really overkill. And in fact, the best option for most of us may just be YouTube. YouTube has an online video editor. You can upload your video, and then right there in the web browser, you can edit it. It's nothing fancy, but you can clip, add interesting parts to it, clip off boring parts. You can add music to it. So, for most of us, it's really all you need, and it's free, and it works in a web browser. And then right from there, obviously, you can share it on YouTube, which is a great option. Vimeo is another popular video service. Requires a subscription to use some of the better features, but maybe has a few more high-end features than YouTube. That's another good option. The other thing to keep in mind is that both of these camera manufacturers that we've talked about the most, Garmin and GoPro, they have editing suites that you can use for free. These are free software downloads. So GoPro has what they call Cineform, which is a pretty decent app for editing video, adjusting white balance, and all that. Pretty easy to use, and then you can save those files and share them from the Cineform app. Garmin has a similar type of app. This is, again, a desktop app called VIRB Edit. Same thing. The nice thing with VIRB Edit is this is where you could do your GPS overlay, which you see here. So this is where you could make use of that GPS data you had. You can do a little overlay on the video. You can even overlay G-meter. So this is where you can unlock some of the additional features in that Garmin VIRB. If you're really lazy, I'll just mention to you a Sporty service that can be handy. And this is in response to customer said, I went out and I shot a video of my first solo, and now what do I do? Well, we can help if you don't feel like doing it or if you don't know how to do it. It's called My Solo. So you send your solo video raw as it is to us and our professional video team who makes videos for a living. We'll edit it, add audio, make it a really slick professional presentation. You can see here it's a Garmin VIRB we're using that has the GPS overlay. And for $59.95, we'll get you a video on YouTube that you can share with the whole world that's been professionally edited. We've covered a lot of ground there tonight. I want to give you a couple of resources just for more information here, and then be happy to answer some questions. So we have a really good GoPro Quick Start Guide. You can see the short link down there at the bottom. And it's just a real good way sort of unpackaging the GoPro, how to get started, how to get those settings adjusted. Garmin has a pretty good GoPro, or a pretty good VIRB Quick Start Guide in their package. We'll probably do one of these as well for VIRB here shortly, but good way to get off the ground and get shooting video. The other one, sporties.com/video on our website, that has all of that has the VIRB, the GoPro, all these GoPro and VIRB accessories we've talked about, the iPhone accessories. Don't take it from me. Go read the customer reviews, see what people are saying, watch the video demos. This is really where you can get educated about them, and if you so choose, purchase them.